Imagine hiking the Appalachian Trail when something not right catches your eye. Strange lights, unexplained anomalies, even rumors of a hidden race with moon-like eyes. What? If the unexplained fascinates you, you won't want to miss this one. In the summer of 2011, Brad Lane set out on a solo backpacking trip near Catawba, about 15 miles from Newcastle, Virginia. Now, the Appalachian Trail, it's a place that's no stranger to tales of the bizarre and unexplained, stretching 1,500 miles from Newfoundland to central Alabama. These ancient mountains just seem to hold secrets that we may never fully understand. And so as Brad hiked deeper into the vast wilderness, he couldn't shake this feeling that something was just off. Even though everything around him was calm, he started to feel a bit on edge. And on several lonely nights during his camping trip, Brad had found himself wide awake, heart pounding in his chest, as the sound of twigs snapping and leaves were rustling, and it filled the air just outside of his tent. And then there was this strange, unsettling grumble, a deep voice that seemed to be muttering to itself in the darkness. And at first, Brad tried to dismiss it as his mind just playing tricks on him from the isolation, but the feeling persisted. And as he lay frozen in his sleeping bag, he could hear the footsteps growing closer and closer, accompanied by the ominous grumbling noises. Each time they reached a crescendo, the sounds would just abruptly stop, leaving Brad alone with his racing heart, paranoid thoughts. But on one particular restless night, as he just lay there in the darkness, he actually caught a glimpse of something moving just outside his tent. It was just a shadow at first, but it was enough to make him sit up in his sleeping bag, heart in his throat, and question whether he was truly alone out in the wilderness altogether. So one night, Brad's just chilling by his campfire, puffing on a cigarette, when the craziest thing then happens. He gets up to poke the fire a bit, flicks his cigarette into the flames, and when he turns around to sit back down, he stops dead in his tracks. There's this dude reaching for his firewood with a hand that looks like it's been barbecued. The guy's wearing red plaid and has these massive black burn marks just ripping through his clothes, and his beard is all smoky and red ash. But the weirdest part is his eyes are totally blank, just pure white, and they're locked right onto Brad's. And then he bares his teeth and scrunches up his nose in this almost freaky grimace before he vanishes altogether as quickly as he showed up. Now at this point, Brad was scared out of his mind, more terrified than he'd ever been before. He didn't waste any time packing up his stuff and basically booking it out of there, trying to put as much space between him and that creepy encounter as possible. And he kept going for hours, running purely on adrenaline until he was simply too tired to go any further. But even then, sleep wouldn't come at all. All he could think was about that horrifying image playing on repeat in his head. And after a few hours, Brad woke up to an awful smell that made him feel sick. It was like this melted plastic, and it filled his nose. And so he looked around, not believing not only what he saw, but what he was experiencing. His tent where he had been sleeping was completely destroyed. It was just a bubbling pile of green plastic now. Thick smoke would rise from the mess, and the tent poles were just dripping with the gooey remains of all that was left. This used to be his safe place in these woods. Well, not anymore. Brad was completely and utterly shocked and confused. He was living in a nightmare. And so he quickly grabbed his water bottle and started running through the deserted field. And at this point, his heart is racing, and he was able to reach a gravel road, just gasping for breath and covered in sweat. Now, he sees a sheriff's car parked nearby, and in his panicked state, it brought him some comfort and somewhat of a glimmer of hope in the midst of all this chaos. And so he walks toward the car and noticed something very weird. The vehicle was parked next to a destroyed house with only the mailbox left standing. And on the way to town, Brad didn't say anything about his strange encounter in the woods, afraid that this sheriff would think he was crazy. And instead, he began asking about how the house had burned down. And then the sheriff dropped a bombshell. Turns out that house that he had just started his trip at, it had burned down 4 days ago, a family of 4 dead, 2 daughters, a wife, and her husband. Now, the sheriff actually thinks it was arson, but they had no suspects at all yet. And as you can imagine, Brad was in total shock. He couldn't wrap his head around what he was hearing. And his jaw dropped and he just kind of kept shaking his head just with the timing of it all. And the bizarre coincidence with his own frightening encounter on the trail, I mean, it was all too much to ignore for him. There had to be some sort of connection. This wasn't just a figment of his imagination, it was something bigger and more sinister. So we're left with these kind of lingering questions. Who was that mysterious burnt guy who showed up at Brad's campfire? What actually went down with that family? And how does it all connect to the creepy stuff that Brad encountered in the woods? Unfortunately, it's all a mystery. Years ago, back in June, Rick, who's this huge fan of the Appalachian Trail, was basically camping by himself near Pierce Pond in Maine. And of course, the weather was beautiful, not too hot or muggy, and very soon, night began to quickly fall, and Rick would find himself sitting around the campfire just enjoying the nighttime around him. And it was here he decided to pull out his trusty old friend, his old harmonica. And so as this is going on, he begins to hear a strange noise that sounds unfamiliar to him. Now, he couldn't identify who it was or what it was, but that it was coming from someone very close by. Now, even his gut instincts were screaming at him that something different was happening. And he saw something in the moonlight that took him aback. He sat as still as possible, kind of slouching in a sleeping bag, and there was no doubt in his mind that it was a figure moving across his line of sight, because between him and the pond, he could see this kind of spectral form. It was like this woodsy outdoorsman, and it was carrying a small pack and what appeared to be fishing gear. And as the figure kind of faded into the night, he really had no idea how to explain what it was he saw. He thought what he saw was strange, but he was just quick to try and write it off because, I mean, what else was he gonna do? And so Rick at that point just decided that, enough was enough. He was just going to go to bed. I mean, maybe he was just getting too tired and was just saying things. And so come the following morning, the sun is out, it's a beautiful day, and he's awoken feeling refreshed, revived, and ready to tackle another day. And now, even though the previous night did really spook him, he tried not to think about it too much. And as the day went on, Rick went around and just kind of explored and hiked some more of the area. And so fast forward to that evening, and once again, he's around the campfire just like the night previously, and the same thing happens. He hears this odd shuffling noise, and then he sees it. The same figure from the previous night, kind of just shambling out into the open, and this time, it's actually looking at him and following his movements. And so Rick is terrified at this point. He's not really sure what to do, and out of a fear response, he just takes off running, abandoning his campsite and all of his things until he's just completely out of breath. He's thinking, I'm in danger, I have to get out of here. Well, eventually, exhaustion takes over, and he ends up hunkering down by this small tree all the way until morning comes. And so he's groggy, he's sleep deprived, he's sore, he's exhausted. He kind of just shuffles his way back to his campsite in the morning, grabs his stuff because he's certainly not sleeping here another night, and bails out of the area. Now, Interestingly, the next place he goes is to a place called Tim's, which is a diner in the area, for some pancakes. And as he's sitting there eating breakfast and getting his morning coffee, he began sharing his experiences with what he saw to some of the people who work there. And as it turns out, there are a ton of strange things that other hikers like him have sighted in the area, specifically strange ghostly apparitions. And even for more context, the Appalachian Trail is home to many places that are said to be intensely haunted. In fact, one such location is the Greenleaf Hut, and this is situated in the picturesque White Mountains of Virginia, atop Bluff Mountain. Now, the only concerning thing about this little quaint scenic spot is a marker indicating where a 4-year-old by the name of Odie Klein Powell had died over 100 years ago after going missing while out hunting for kindling. Now, since then, there have actually been numerous reports of ghostly children stalking the wilderness, wandering as if searching for something. In fact, another very haunted spot along the trail in Virginia is the Sarver Cabin, which was built back in the 1850s and surrounded by complete untamed wilderness. Now, this particular place, the crumbling ruins are said to be haunted by some sort of unidentified ghost named George, and apparently he makes his presence known to all who pass by. And even years ago in the 19th century, there was this family called the Hutchinsons who lived in an old homestead in Tennessee's Big Ridge State Park. And so one of the younger members of the family by the name of Mary, she was a very little girl, she fell really sick, and normally something like this happens back then. Well, the neighbors would come over and try to help you out, you know. Well, when the neighbors showed up at the Hutchinsons' place, they said they heard the weirdest thing, the sound of a dog running through the forest towards them. Could this be the hellhound? Who knows? Despite not actually seeing a dog, it became clear to them that poor little Mary had passed away right around the same time they heard that phantom dog. Now, clearly there was something supernatural going on, and in fact, ever since that day, people have talked about reported seeing the ghost of a little girl, as well as hearing the sounds of this spectral dog roaming around the area, specifically around the old Hutchinson homestead in the woods. So despite it being abandoned for ages and in complete ruin, that whole area is basically said to be haunted by the spirit of this young girl and this hellhound. No, it's not just some random rumor either. I mean, there are multiple people throughout the years who have witnessed some of this really strange stuff. Now, if we go back even further, we'll see it doesn't get any better, because many moons ago, on September 3rd, 1862, there was a considerable battle that took place right around the Compton's Gap area. And it was straight up brutal, with the ground getting completely drenched in blood and bodies just scattered everywhere. Basically an absolute massacre. I mean, this battle alone saw almost 900 casualties. That's a lot of death, if you ask me. People have also claimed to spot the actual spirits of Civil War soldiers roaming around these same old battlegrounds. So despite it being over 150 years since that massive bloodbath went down, the area is still giving off a lot of negative energy. And it's not hard to see why when you remember the sheer scale of death and destruction that happened there back in 1862. I mean, the amount of pain and suffering those hills witnessed was just unimaginable. Now, as for the strange woodsman encountered by the camper in Maine, the mysterious figure, the ghostly child of Greenleaf Hut, the phantom hound, and the girl of Big Ridge State Park, and the restless spirits of Civil War soldiers at Spook Hill, their true nature remains a mystery. In the early 2000s, a family of 3 decided to go on a camping trip along the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania. And the family consisted of a father named Todd, a mother, and their 10-year-old daughter, Emma. and they were excited to spend some quality time together in nature and just create those long-lasting memories. And as they arrived at their chosen campsite, a small clearing in the woods, Emma and her mother began to feel uneasy. Now, despite the peaceful surroundings they found themselves in, there was just this ominous vibe that seemed to permeate the area. And Emma's mother, pale and tightly grasping her daughter's hand, asked Todd, the dad, if they could set up camp somewhere else. However, Todd, not wanting to search for firewood in the dark, decided just to stay put. And so after enjoying a dinner of hot dogs and marshmallows, the family decided to crawl into their 6-person tent. Todd was asleep within minutes, but Emma and her mother found it very difficult to drift off. Emma, still very scared, confided in her mother, who tried to comfort her by assuring her that they were safe inside the tent and that there's nothing to worry about. Now, the next morning, Emma woke up early and found her mother sitting on the ground meditating with a cup of her Earl Grey tea, as she did every morning. Emma asked if they could take a walk, and her mother agreed, reminding her not to go too far as not to worry their father. And so as they hiked near their campsite, Emma's mother suddenly stopped, and she started to look at this hazy image of a man leaning against a tree, a birch tree, about 20 feet away. Now, the man appeared calm and peaceful, not threatening in any way, and he kind of lifted his head and looked in their direction before vanishing in front of them. And so Emma rubbed her eyes, and her mother and her both shared a silent understanding that the man was not a threat, just a sad and peaceful presence. Interestingly, this is not the only paranormal experience reported along the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania. Another account posted on Your Personal Ghost Stories tells us of a group of friends who were backpacking along the trail when they had an unsettling encounter. One morning, the group woke up to the eerie sound of children's laughter echoing from the surrounding woods. And as they peered into the early morning mist, they witnessed the procession of children walking by their camp, and the children asked the baffled hikers what they were doing out there. And when the hikers replied that they were on the Appalachian Trail, these mysterious children just kind of cheerfully responded that this isn't the Appalachian Trail. And then they just kind of vanished from sight altogether. Now, throughout the remainder of their hike, the group reported hearing the taunting laughter of children that kind of emanated from the trees and underbrush, although they never saw the children again. As for the identity of the ghostly man that Emma and her mother encountered, the meaning of the children's cryptic message, and the source of the disembodied laughter that followed the group of hikers, it all remains a mystery. Now, this next story, the last one, is easily probably the most bizarre of all. In 1797, Benjamin Smith Barton, an American botanist, naturalist, and physician, wrote about a mysterious race of beings known as the Moon-Eyed People. In fact, in his book, New Views of the Origin of the Tribes and Nations of America, according to the Cherokee people, these enigmatic creatures inhabited the southern Appalachian Mountains long before the first native peoples ever settled in the area. And so interestingly, he really learned of these beings by a Cherokee hunter named Running Deer. And he was known throughout his tribe at the time as a skilled tracker and a man of unwavering courage. And so in the fall, when the leaves began to change, Running Deer was sent to the Appalachian Mountains to find a white deer. And it was believed that this spirit animal could give great wisdom if its hide was brought back to the village by someone with a pure heart. And so as Running Deer followed these strange markings, he could feel that the forest was getting darker and more ominous. And the trees began looking very strange, all twisted and gnarled. and just terrifying. And even though he was getting pretty spooked by this, Running Deer kept going because he really wanted to find that rare white deer. But as he went deeper into the mountains, he started hearing these strange voices all around him. And at first, he thought it was just the wind making these strange noises, but he realized they were actual voices. They sounded like they were coming from everywhere at once, and they sounded urgent. And Running Deer came upon a clearing surrounded by tall stone pillars with very intricate designs on them. And in the middle of the clearing, there were these beings that looked totally different from anything he had ever seen before. They were pale, they had big round eyes that shone like moons, their hair was long and white, and they wore simple clothing made out of skins. And they also had bows and arrows and other primitive weapons with them. And so Running Deer kind of just watched as these beings talked to each other in their own language, something he didn't understand, and they seemed really focused and kept pointing to different places in the forest. And so he began feeling braver, and he stepped out from behind a tree and cautiously approached them. And when they saw him, they stopped talking and looked at him curiously. And so he had tried to say hello in his own language, but he didn't get a response. And he tried other Native American languages that he knew, but still no luck. And realizing that they couldn't understand him, instead of speaking, Running Deer used hand signals to communicate with these strange moon-eyed people. And they motioned for him to come closer, and they offered him food and water. And of course, at this point, he was very grateful for their hospitality, and he ate and studied their unique, bizarre appearance. Again, pale skin that kind of glowed in the firelight, large round eyes like shiny marbles with flecks of silver. Although he couldn't understand what they spoke, he was almost entranced by the melodic cadence of their voices. And after finishing the meal they gave him, they led him to one of these stone pillars that was covered in these intricate carvings that depicted people, animals, plants, and other various symbols. And they pointed to an image of a deer and then to the forest. And the moon-eyed people showed him where to find the rare white deer. And so, being extremely gracious, he then placed his hand on his heart before setting off deeper into the ancient forest. And so at this point, the moon was so bright that it kind of guided his path and almost showed him the trail like only a skilled hunter like himself could see. And he was more determined than ever to find this white deer and receive its wisdom and bring back to the tribe. Now, the moon-eyed people were described as smaller than average humans, almost dwarfish in nature, with again pale white skin, shocking white hair, and generous beards and unusually large blue eyes. Their eyes were so sensitive to light that they were said to be unable to see during the daytime, hence their name. Now, these nocturnal beings would hide in dark caves and underground caverns during the day, only emerging at night when the sun had retreated. In fact, sunlight was believed to be deadly to them if they were to ever be caught in the open hours of daylight. And so Running Deer was so fascinated by the moon people and their hidden ways, and as he would continue deeper into the forest that nobody had been in at this time, guided by the light that the moon people supposedly provided, he almost wondered if these were actually spirit beings of some kind and not a whole different tribe of people, because what was their purpose in these lands? And the next thing he knew, he was falling on his face unconscious. And then the next thing he knew after that, he woke up and the moon-eye people froze because they had apparently kidnapped him and taken him into one of the recesses of their dark caverns. And just as he was awakening, he kind of opened his eyes and could see he was surrounded by several of them. Now, this is where things get deeply disturbing. Running Deer was basically let go and was able to sit down with these moon-eyed people and noticed something very, very off. They were eating human body parts, some of which had tribal tattoos from his tribe on them, and he tried not to panic and attack because he didn't want to show fear in their territory and being surrounded and all, but it was hard for him to keep calm. And the eldest of the moon-eyed man could tell he was very uncomfortable and explained that they only eat people who disrespect their land. Now, apparently, it was a way to gain power and prevent enemies from coming back. Running deer didn't like it, but he knew he had to focus on finding the white deer, so he ate some deer meat that the elder gave him, even though it made him sick. And after that, the elder took him by the hand deeper, where apparently he made a portal made of glowing energy. And the elder wanted Running Deer to go through it, and so Running Deer hesitated, and these beings began to turn violent and actually forced him into this opening into another world. A world that Running Deer described was vibrant in color with strange noises, and he found himself standing in this strange place that was foreign to him. The forest he knew was gone, and it was replaced by this mysterious new place, and suddenly, a ghostly white deer appeared in front of him, emanating wisdom like a lighthouse in the dark. He realized these beings didn't open a portal, they were able to pull him into the spirit realm. And between this white deer and the hunter, they almost had a silent conversation where the deer asked Running Deer why he had come to their realm, and he would explain his village's troubles, and the spirit animal listened with understanding. As it came to be, the response wasn't spoken out loud, but it echoed in his mind. The deer spoke of an imbalance caused by his own people of not respecting the beings of the forest. Now, long ago, these creatures were apparently protectors until they were pushed away by Running Deer's ancestors. The solution offered was simple yet profound. A trade must be made. And so at this point, Running Deer is terrified as he realized what was expected of him. He would have to stay in this spirit world forever, while one last deer from there would come back with him to restore balance to his tribe's land. As he thought about his family and tribe waiting for him at home, he began to cry, and the weight of this decision would bear down on him so heavy, because if he was to say no, not only would his fate be at stake, but also that of everyone back at home. And so this is when these beings showed their true colors, that they appeared to masquerade as good, but were very evil and vindictive if their demands weren't met. And Running Deer had to make a horrific decision. He knew he had to put his own wants aside for the sake of his people, and reluctantly, he agreed to the trade offered by the white deer spirit. And it was a heavy burden on his heart, but he braced himself for the consequences, and as expected, he was transformed into a white hairless deer and returned to his tribe as their chief. However, this choice angered the Moonite people, who then declared war on Running Deer's tribe. They covered themselves in a dark substance from their cave and became twisted beings and monsters. And the ensuing battle left both sides devastated, and even the land suffered from the destruction. Now, interestingly, the Cherokee and other Native American tribes told stories of expelling these strange people from their lands. The exact nature of this expulsion varied from tradition to tradition, with some tales describing the Cree people driving them out, while others spoke of the Cherokees waging a relentless war against the pale-skinned creatures. Now, despite their supposed expulsion, the legacy of the Moonite people remained in the form of ancient rock structures. Even mysterious pre-Columbian mounds and ruins scattered all throughout the Appalachians from, North Carolina to Georgia and Alabama, they remain a piece of history. And one of the most famous examples is an 850-foot-long stone wall in Fort Mountain State Park, Georgia, which is believed to date back to roughly 500 BC. This wall is said to be a remnant of the bloody conflict between the Moonite people and the Cherokee. In addition to the stone wall, countless other crude rock structures, walls, mounds, and forts can be found throughout the Appalachians. Anomalous carvings, figurines, and a soapstone carving of conjoined figures now displayed at the Cherokee County Historical Museum are also attributed to these mysterious people. And so when Europeans first arrived in the region, the natives, who were not known for building such fort-like structures themselves, claimed that these constructions had always been there and were the work of the Moonite people. Again, While Cherokee folklore is rich with tales of the supernatural and beings and various spirits, like the one I told you, the Moon-Eyed people are never really spoken of in such a manner, instead being described matter-of-factly as another physical race that inhabited the same lands. The true identity of the Moon people have really been the subject of much speculation and theorizing over the years. In fact, one popular idea suggests they may be evidence of native contact with European explorers who had reached the New World long before recorded history, possibly connected to the legend of the Welsh-speaking Indians. Now, this legend originates from 16th century manuscripts by Welsh antiquarian Humphrey Lloyd, which tells of a prince, Madoc, and his followers emigrating from Wales to America right around 1170, landing near Mobile Bay, Alabama. And according to the story, Madoc brought hundreds of settlers to the New World where they vanished into the wilderness, never to return again. But in the following centuries, tales of fair-skinned, blue-eyed natives who spoke a form of Welsh somehow circulated in the area, leading some to speculate that they were the descendants of these Welsh settlers. Another theory, proposed by Benjamin Smith Barton, suggests that the Moon-Eyed people might have been descendants of the Guna people, and were even once referred to as the White Indians. The Guna were also reportedly able to see better at night, with some researchers having also considered the possibility that, rather than going to war, the natives of the land integrated with the Moon-Eyed people and absorbed them into their own populations. More far-out theories propose that the Moon-Eyed people were a different species of human altogether, a new race, or even ancient astronauts from another plane of existence. But despite the various theories and speculations, the true identity of the Moon-Eyed people remains a mystery. And because you guys made it this far into the episode, I want you to all comment down below Moon Eyes, so that way I know who made it to the end of the episode and who didn't. And if you guys enjoy content like this, where I talk about all things mysterious, strange, unexplained, and supernatural, then you should totally hit that like and subscribe button for more content just like this. As always, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the very next video.